Hello everyone, and welcome to the Age Group Triathlon Podcast. My name is Simon Orley, I'm a professional triathlon coach, and in this week's episode I'm going to be looking at how to cycle outside on the road safely. This may be arguably the most important episode I've ever done. I probably should have done it sooner. But I'm going to be helping you understand, how to overcome any kind of fears or anxieties, how to make sure your bike is roadworthy, how to make sure that you're protecting yourself as best you can. Could be looking at how to handle downhills, corners, junctions, how to navigate other road users, cars, safe cycling in a group, planning routes. I'm really going to go into the weeds here a bit to help you. If you are a bit nervous or a bit uncertain about going out and riding on the road, and help you feel more confident and well informed about everything, and some numbers to help support that actually, riding on the road isn't actually outrageously dangerous after all. Before we get started, however, I do have an exciting update for you, and that is that my Step Up to Ironman training plans are now finished. Now, these are a series of training plans that I've written for people who are already 70.3 fit. They've either completed a 70.3 or they feel that, realistically they should be able to. And they want to step up to an Ironman. So these, what I've done with these plans that I think is different to every other plan out there, is that instead of going for the standard, here's an 8-week plan and a 12-week plan and, doing it in multiples of 4 or even sort of more sometimes, I've written a 12-week, 13-week, 14-week, 15-week, 16-week, 17-week, all the way up to 50-week training plan for you. So you don't need to adapt the plan. Rather than having to do calculations and work out how is it I'm going to do this, if you purchase this training plan, you're going to be able to get started straight away. Now, obviously, this took me a long time to put all of these plans together, but I'd like to think it's worth it to be able to help ensure that, I'm giving you something that you can use immediately no matter where you are in your training. Each plan is delivered via Training Peaks, and I include with each plan 2 free resources. My Training Peaks for Triathletes course. So that is a short course that helps you navigate the complex world of the Training Peaks software. Training Peaks is the world leader in triathlon training software, but it can be quite complex. So I break all the information down that you need to know to be able to follow that plan, to set your thresholds, to be able to make that plan work for you without you looking at this plan going, I've got no idea what any of this means. I also include a triathlon training guide, and the idea with this training guide is that it talks you through how to adapt the plan to illness, how to manage injury, the basics of swim technique, nutrition, set up equipment. It really does take you through sort of the basics of triathlon training and help you navigate the plan so that even when things go wrong, even when you end up losing some time to illness or injury, that you can self-adjust with this training guide. These plans start at £26 and they run from 12 weeks until 50 weeks. If you're interested, I'm going to have a link down in the show notes for you to be able to go and to pick up your copy, and I'm going to give you a 15% discount. Now, this is an evergreen discount, okay? You could be listening to this in 3-4 years' time. The discount code will still work. Use the discount code podcast, okay? Block capitals, podcast, and that get you 15% off of the Step Up to Ironman training plans. Now, riding on the road, it's very intimidating because, I imagine nearly all of us, we learn to ride either on sort of very gentle trails, on pavements, on our driveway, at the local park. We learned to cycle somewhere that was sort of a safe space where there was only us and maybe some pedestrians, and to then suddenly go out and share a space with some cars that can be doing 3-4 times the speed that we'll be doing, and they are big metal boxes often piloted by idiots. This is understandably going to create some anxiety in people. Now, I guess I had the sort of the benefit when I first started road cycling. I was 22, 23, I think. You're at that age where you're smart enough not to go out and to do anything really stupid, but you're also largely ignorant of sort of the risk. You still feel a little bit invincible at that age, don't you? And so I had no real sort of issues with, oh yes, I'll just learn to cycle on the road then, even though I was in London at the time. And, I just sort of threw myself into it and I got going. But I understand that there are some people for whom either they are just, they just feel a lot more vulnerable than others, or they may have had bad experiences, read bad stories, and they really want to do a triathlon, but they are just nervous, they're anxious about cycling outside. And they think, well, I'll just do all of my training indoors and I'll just ride outside on race day on the closed roads where I don't have to worry about cars. And, assuming that your race is on closed roads. This could work, but you will be a lot slower than you could be if you'd gone out and you cycled outside. I do believe that cycling outside, it really does make you feel alive. There are so many benefits to it, not only from a sporting and performance side of things, but also it's a great way to get around town. If you just want to nip down the road to pick something up from the shop, just jump on your bike with a rucksack, go down, pick it up, lock your bike up. It's a lot cheaper, it's a lot easier, it's often a lot faster than having to get the car out and going and finding a space and parking up. There are a lot of reasons for which, I would encourage everyone to get comfortable cycling on the road. If nothing else, it's just fun. And, we need to remember that we're in this for fun at the end of the day. So I really do encourage you to do that, and to sort of to reassure, those of you in the UK at least. Now, I know I'd like to think I do a reasonable job on this podcast of being sort of accessible to people living in different parts of the world and having sort of slight disclaimers for, when this may not be true elsewhere. This podcast is going to be centered around cycling on the road in the UK because I'm British. The majority of the listenership to this podcast is British. And for those of you who live in other parts of the world, you may just have to I'll add in a few bits, but you may need to translate some bits. There's a difference between a left-hand turn and right-hand turn, depending on which side of the road you ride on. Because I could spend half the episode going, but in North America you might need to. And I've heard that in this part of the world. There's only so much of that I can fit in the episode. So bear in mind this is going to be a UK-centric episode, I'm afraid. But in the UK, there is only one cyclist death for every 333 million miles ridden on a bike. Now, you may think, Simon, doesn't really reassure me that much. But when you consider that figure, it includes people who ride straight through red lights. It includes people who are drunk riding home from the pub. It includes people who are riding on the road at night with no lights. It includes sort of daredevils, those who are really confident cyclists who are pushing the limit on a downhill, and maybe, find themselves caught out or hit a pothole or a rock or something, or even those that might be trying to escape from the police at the time. Cycling is an inherently safe activity. It's no more dangerous than any other method of travel. I mean, if you look at the statistics, air travel is the safest way to travel, hands down. But because there's this sort of fear that people project, and I can understand how some people are scared of flying. But I guess because you are less in control than when you are driving, people perceive it as being inherently risky. Cycling on the road is not an inherently dangerous way to get around, but that's not to say that we don't need to take some, certain precautions. Now, I mentioned that I started cycling around London. This was before I was a triathlete. I just wanted to get a bike to get around. And something I've learned is that the vast majority of cyclists who end up in accidents are either nervous, unconfident cyclists or overly confident cyclists. If somebody is extremely nervous and they are perhaps riding too close to the curb, if they are gripping the handlebars so tightly they're actually wobbling around while they ride, and they're pedalling really slowly because they're nervous, and drivers are then taking risks around them and pulling out in front of them because they can't stand the idea of being held up because, we've got no idea how important all of these drivers are and the places they've got to be. The fact that cyclists could be heading to work themselves never seems to cross their mind. But I never, in my 10 years of riding around London, I'd say not quite on a daily basis, but, at least 3-4 times a week, I never once got hit. The closest that I came to being knocked off of my bike was actually when I was cycling through Tooting, which is a horrible place to ride a bike on the Cycle Superhighway 7. I'm sure at least a few of you be familiar with this. And there was an ambulance that was coming up behind, and this van just swerved to the left without looking what was coming, and I had to take evasive action. That is the closest that I came. Now, some of that is down to sheer dumb luck. I just so happened to be in the right places at the right time. But I'd like to think that a large part of the reason that I didn't get myself into trouble was awareness. It was thinking 2 steps ahead. If I'm going to go through this junction, where's this car going to be? This car's going to try to overtake me at this next point. There's a traffic island ahead. I might move into the centre of the road. To be able to really think ahead, plan ahead, not ride recklessly, but ride confidently at, a reasonable speed. That's not to say that I was pushing it all the time. I wasn't. But, I went out and I rode at, what I guess, might turn to be like a zone 2, zone 3 pace most of the time. I positioned myself carefully. I didn't ride through red lights. I obeyed all the traffic laws. And, I managed to get cycling around hundreds of thousands of kilometres on London roads without a single incident. That's not to say that I didn't fall off my bike a couple of times. But it's... Even in somewhere like London, where road deaths for cyclists are quite high, if you are a cyclist who pays attention, who is very aware, you are not necessarily at a massively increased risk. In fact, I think there are actually more pedestrian deaths in built-up areas at least than there are cyclist deaths. So if you can find it in you to be able to walk on the pavement, then I'm sure you can find the courage to ride a bike. Now, there are a few checks that we need to make before we take our bike out on the road, especially if it's a bike that we pulled out of the shed that hasn't been ridden for several years. So we want to make sure the bike is roadworthy, basically. We need to make sure that the brakes work. That is the single most important thing. You want to make sure that when you squeeze the brake levers that something happens. Now, the importance of this, it's pretty self-explanatory, really. You need to be able to stop in a predictable, reliable manner. You can't afford to have it that you pull the brake lever, and it's only when you pull the brake lever really quite far back that the braking action actually starts to bite. This could be that you need to bleed your hydraulic brakes. This could be that you need to readjust your brake pads if you have rim brakes, but you need to make sure that you're able to to really jump on those brakes and to be able to stop you quite quickly. You don't want the brakes to be too tight, too twitchy. You don't want to get to the point where if you apply a bit too much pressure, you go flying over the handlebars because you locked up your front brake. But you do need to make sure that your brakes are working reliably. You also need to make sure that if you're using a quick release bike with skewers, those skewers are nice and tight. You want to make sure that when you lift your bike off the floor and you wobble the wheels, that they stay absolutely pinned into where it is that they're going to be. And you also want to make sure that your saddle is the correct height and that it is nice and stable. Now, the correct height for a saddle, if you are just starting out and you're nervous about riding on the road, it could be a bit lower if that makes you feel happier. But if you want to set your saddle up for the right efficiency, then you need to make sure that when you're pedaling, that when you're at the bottom of the pedal stroke, that your leg is just short of being fully extended. You don't want it to be fully extended because then you'll probably have to drop your hips slightly to each side as you cycle. But you do want to make sure that you are really quite close to a full leg extension. If your saddle is too low, that will allow you to put your feet on the ground easier, because if your saddle is at the correct, most efficient height, you'll need to lean your bike to the side to put a foot down. If your saddle is set to the correct height, as it were, then you will need to lean the bike, which I know it can be intimidating. It can be another thing to think about and to worry about. What's most important really is that the saddle is nice and secure. Okay, so that you can sort of rock it around, try and push it up and down with your hands, and it doesn't go anywhere. Because what we don't want is for you to be riding along, and then suddenly your saddle drops sort of straight down to the bottom of the seat tube there. That is quite possibly going to result in a crash, or at least some very painful damage to some soft tissue down there. Now, I recommend that all cyclists, no matter the weather, run daytime lights. And this is something that would have been considered heresy when I first started cycling, where the idea of having any lights on the bike was somewhat abhorrent. But in this day and age, it really is the safest way to be. Now, these are small lights, LED, rechargeable, they're pretty punchy, they last for ages. But you have them on the front and rear of your bike, a red flashing light on the back and a white flashing light on the front. These are not big, powerful lights. But what they're there to do is they are there to catch the attention of drivers. Now, you may notice as you cycle, walk, drive around that a lot of cyclists actually have these lights. And the reason for this is that even in conditions where, they don't need the lights to be seen like you would if you're riding at night, it draws the driver's attention. I saw a study a while back that looked at the use in technology to track drivers' eyes as they were driving along. And the majority of drivers, when they approached a cyclist, their eyes didn't actually move towards the cyclist. They didn't look at the cyclist and go, oh, that's a cyclist. They just kind of went on autopilot and kind of overtook them without really thinking about it. And I do believe that a lot of close passes and poor driver behaviour out there is down more to ignorance and somebody not paying attention, which in itself could be careless driving, more than is sort of malicious, I want to, really put the frighteners on these cyclists. There are some people out there, normally in fast, expensive cars, who will want to do that. The majority of the time, people just aren't paying attention, they're not thinking. The way that we can go around that as cyclists is if we have these flashing lights on our bikes, then it does make somebody go, oh, what's that light? Oh, there's a cyclist there. And that sort of forces people to engage their brains, because instead of thinking, oh, I need to get around this piece of road furniture in front of me, they think, that's a person on the bike. How can I best overtake them? So I really do recommend that you have some daytime lights on your bike. And they also, they're really good to have if you find yourself, you head out riding, and especially in the winter time, and the daylight starts to disappear on you a bit sooner than you realise. You may have got stuck, spent longer than you planned at the cafe, you may have had a mechanical problem, you may have added a bit of distance onto the route, and before you notice it, before you realise it, you see the sun's pretty low in the sky, and you think, oh crikey, I need to get home. If you have these lights on your bike already, it makes you a lot safer. Choosing the right clothing is also important. Now, I don't believe that everyone who goes out on a ride needs to look like a highlighter. I really don't. If you're riding in the daytime, if you have a flashing light, then the colour of your clothing, it does not matter. It will not, if there were any kind of investigation into a potential crash or injury, the fact that it was broad daylight and you had a rear flashing light will make any sort of anything regarding the clothing redundant. However, if you are going to be out on a gloomy day, if you are going to be heading out early in the morning, or you know that you're going to be getting back as the light is starting to fade, you probably do need to think about the kind of clothing that you're wearing. And look at where it is that you're cycling and take things into consideration. As an example, if you're riding in the UK, where there are lots of hedgerows along many of our roads, if you are wearing green or blue, sort of a dark blue, then there is a chance that you will start to fade into that hedgerow and you could be harder to spot. Equally, if you're going to be out riding in winter on a gloomy day, then wearing black clothing probably isn't ideal. If you do have, say, I've got a very nice cycling jacket from I think 2013 when we were less conscious of these things. It's a nice winter jacket. I don't wear it much these days, but it's staying in my wardrobe, because I make sure that I have various other sort of reflective areas. I have 2 lights on my bike in winter, and I only ever wear that in the day. Whereas if I would not cycle at night with just that, with just that black jacket on. I would want to make sure that I was wearing something that was much brighter, that had reflective strips on it as well. So do take this into consideration if you are going to be out cycling where visibility isn't going to be so good. A quick reminder for those of you who aren't aware, if you're riding in urban environments, then high visibility, so that is that neon pink or yellow or orange, that is the colour that jumps out the most. Whereas if you are riding outside of any street lights, if you're riding in rural areas at night, then having a reflective details, or either there are some sort of jackets, jerseys out there that you can get that are covered in a purely reflective material. That is what you need to reflect the headlights of cars back so that you really stand out. Next up, I know this should go without saying, but wear a helmet. You know, you can do or use all of the mental gymnastics that you want to try to justify the fact that you don't need to wear a helmet. But if you are going out as a triathlete, if you are going to be out training, if you are, you know, you're not just heading down the shops on a cycle track, yeah, you probably don't need to wear a helmet then. But if you're going to be out riding on rural roads, if you're going to be encountering a lot of junctions, if you're going to be riding at speed, you need to wear a helmet. It's just common sense. You need to wear a helmet on race day anyway, so you might as well get used to it in training. You'll want to make sure that you have a charged phone with you, so that if you do find yourself in any problems, then you can call for help. I know some people want to leave all the electronics behind and just enjoy being out there on the road, but if nothing else, just stick your phone on airplane mode. Stick it in your pocket, or if you have a larger saddlebag, you might be able to fit it in there. But to be honest, the kind of things that you stick in saddlebags might well be able to scratch up that phone. But in this day and age, you really do need to make sure that you have something with you to be able to sort of raise the alarm should you find yourself hurt, or you come across, you could as a cyclist be the first at the scene of an accident and be able to call for help. So it is a bit of a non-negotiable in my mind. It could be that you are heading somewhere where there is no phone signal. If you are heading out, in sort of somewhere that is really rural. I mean, I know a lot of areas outside of Europe, there are, quite large swathes of areas where there are no phone signal. You may need to take an alternate means with you for sort of asking for help should you find yourself in trouble. I also highly recommend that you allow your friends, family, loved ones to be able to track you when you're out. Now, the way that I have my phone set up, I'm lucky enough to still have both of my parents. They can both see where I am at any time because, well, I've got nothing to hide. I'm not an especially interesting person. But also, if I'm out on a run, if I'm out on a ride and something happens, then they will be able to see where I am, and they will be able to call an ambulance to get help to me. Because if I find myself knocked unconscious, my iPhone has a crash detection system on it. I recommend that you enable that if you have a phone that has that enabled. Crash detection system so that they can sort of raise the alarm, get help to you if needs be. In this day and age, it could be the difference between you sort of getting help there within sort of 10-15 minutes, or somebody, who has a nasty crash, spills into a dark ditch and people are unable to find them in time. So yeah, I really recommend you have that, and that you have your medical contacts updated on your phone so that if it's a complete stranger calls for an ambulance, the ambulance crew will arrive and they'll be able to access your medical contacts via your phone, and they'll be able to inform your family of where you are and what's happened to you. This may sound a little bit doomsday, but I know I have said that cycling is an inherently safe activity, but we do need to prepare for the worst, okay? Because as much as I've never, lost anyone that I know to accidents on the road, it does happen occasionally. This is a slightly left field one, but make sure that you have some quality eyewear if you are going to be wearing glasses out on the road. Sort of sunglasses. The reason for this is that if you get some really cheap and nasty, and I'm talking, sort of £5 a pair level of eyewear, you don't need to go out and spend sort of £150, £200 on a pair of Oakleys. But if you get a good pair that are sort of £40, £50, something like that, the reason this is important is that the lenses on them are shatterproof. I remember when I had a really nasty crash, I'll touch on that later. I had a really nasty crash, ended up, I've still got a scar under my nose to prove it. But the eyewear that I had, because I landed on my face on the road, the eyewear that I had, it caused a nasty cut just at the bottom of my, I don't know why I'm touching it as if I'm trying to show someone, but nasty cut underneath at the bottom of my eye from where I sort of face planted the road, and my eyewear went and sort of cut a swathe in my eye there. If this was cheap eyewear, there was a chance that when my face hit the floor, that the eyewear could have shattered, and I then have all these sharp pieces of plastic that are going to be sort of in really quite close vicinity to my eye. So yeah, do make sure you get yourself some quality eyewear and don't just go for the cheapest stuff you can get your hands on. You will also want to make sure that you charge your gears. So if you are heading out, or especially on a longer ride, now you won't need to charge your gears up very often at all. But if you say, oh, I'm going to set a reminder to do it on the first of every month, that will suit you absolutely down to the ground. You won't need to worry going forwards about running out of battery. But it is worth just, double checking, especially ahead of a long ride. Have I got enough charge in my gears? Because if you run out of battery on your gears and it dumps you down to the place where you only have sort of 2 gears that you can choose from, by either being your big ring or your small ring, then you're going to find yourself in trouble, and that could affect your ability to be able to to get home safely if you're unable to to pedal your bike the way that you should be able to. So, saying that it's a safety thing, maybe it's a little bit of a stretch, but regardless, it's always worth making sure that you have full charge on your gears before you start. I actually have been at a number of triathlon races. In fact, it happens it's been, quite a few times, normally at least once a race, where there's a voice comes over on the tannoy saying, does anyone have a Di2 charger? If so, please bring it to registration desk, because somebody has got to the race and realised their gears are dead on race day, and that is the last thing that you want. Now, I'm going to be a bit controversial and sort of hypocritical to my past self here. I'm going to recommend that you don't ride with headphones on the road. If you really feel the need to, then if you know that you're riding somewhere like incredibly quiet, you're probably not going to see a car all day. Then if you have a sort of one headphone that is on the side, so in the UK you'd have a headphone in the left ear, so you can still hear traffic passing you on the right, vice versa in other parts of the world, and you have a podcast, audiobooks and music playing at a sensible level to give you something to focus on, to take your mind off things, fair enough. That could be okay. Or even if you wore some bone conduction headphones, that's okay. But I would never really do that in an urban environment. If I were cycling through a city, I want to have all of my wits about me, and also just me as I get older. When I head out on a bike ride, I want to be away from having my brain constantly engaged with something. I want to be able to just switch off and enjoy the sights and the sounds of the countryside. I mean, I'm lucky to live in a lovely part of the world, but I will leave that up to you to make your own decision. But my recommendation would be, don't ride with headphones on, especially not in both ears, especially not very loud, because that does just leave you vulnerable. Finally, and this is a pretty big one, please obey all traffic laws. If you want to stay safe, people expect you to ride in a predictable fashion. And if you don't ride in a predictable fashion, if you are riding the wrong way down the road, because you're just a bike, it doesn't really matter. If you're heading the wrong way down one-way streets, if you're jumping red lights, if you are blazing through pedestrian crossings, if you are riding like a dickhead, okay, not only do you increase the risk of being hurt yourself, you increase the risk of hurting others, and a lot of pedestrians and drivers, other road users, they're going to look at you and be like, what a dick, like what an arsehole, or what a jerk, wherever you are, whatever the term is in the part of your part of the world. And you know what that does? Is the next time they come across another cyclist, they go, oh, here's another one of them arseholes. And they may pass them closer than they should do. They may pull out on them, give them a taste back of their own medicine. You are just, by, breaking traffic laws, you are just generating ill will towards cyclists not just yourself but others as well. So do me a favour, if for no one else, do it for me. Just obey the traffic laws. It's one thing if you are riding down a road that's marked as road closed. You see, I wonder if cyclists can sneak through. Oh, yes, they can. I can just pop along across the pavement, pushing the bike if there's no one else around. Then that's one thing. But if you are deliberately riding down pavements, past pedestrians, swerving around people, if you're cutting up traffic, if you're going through red lights, then yeah, please just don't do that. Now, in many cities, there are cycle paths, or bike paths, whatever you want to call them. And these are areas that are designated for cyclists. In the vast majority of cases, these are simply sort of a line of paint that runs down sort of the side of the road. And the saying goes, paint isn't protection. Especially when, in a lot of areas, that the strip that you have is so narrow that you actually are putting yourself in more danger by riding that close to the pavement than you would be just riding normally. Cycle paths, they're also, a lot of cars will often park on them. They will have no regard for the fact that actually this is a lane for traffic, it's a live traffic lane. They will, often have people walking down them as well. And you will have, assuming that, you are an athlete here, you have a lot of people who are going to be cycling on these paths very slowly. They also tend to be poorly maintained. Now, cycle paths are designed to get more people active. They are designed so that people who would otherwise be too nervous or too scared to cycle can use that to get to school, to get to work, to get to the shops. Okay, and I believe we need more of these. However, for those of us who are going to be riding relatively close to the speed of traffic, they can actually sometimes be a bit more of a hazard than they are a help. They, especially if in the winter time, they're covered with wet leaves, a bunch of thorns, because no one ever bothers to come and to sweep them and to clear them clear them up. They just sort of let all this detritus pile up in them. It can actually be more of a hazard to ride in the cycle lane than it can on the road. Now it's difficult because if you do ride on the road when there's clearly a cycle lane to your left or your right, that is going to really irritate a lot of drivers who may verbally abuse you or give you a close pass or, brake check you or something like that. You never know what unhinged behaviour people might have in store for you. It's a tricky one because especially when you have a lot of cycle paths where you have to give way to traffic at every single junction. So every kind of 50 meters you've got to stop and give way. It's just not a very efficient way for us if we are riding along at close to 20 miles an hour and it's a 30 zone. Our speed, we're going to be sort of cycling so much slower if we're having to go through these. But again, you run the risk of making some drivers irate if you don't. So I will leave it up to you to decide whether to use cycle lanes or not. I don't think there is a single country in the world where cyclists are obligated to use cycle lanes. It's more they may use the cycle lane, but you do leave yourself open to really sort of quite upsetting some drivers if you choose not to. So I will leave that one up to you to decide. If you are a nervous cyclist, then stick in the cycle lane. When riding on the road, there are a number of sort of hazards that we need to consider before we even take into consideration other road users. Potholes is a big one. Now, a pothole that can be a sort of a minor irritation for a driver can end up being really quite serious for a cyclist. Because, well, there are two reasons for this. We're smaller, our tyres are narrower. And we don't have active suspension in the same way. So if we hit a big pothole, it could send you crashing off of your bike. The other reason it's an issue is that because a lot of potholes tend to be close to the curb, if we are riding along in traffic and we see a pothole in front of us, and there are cars that are passing us legally, safely on our right, we may not have many options except to ride through that pothole. Or have to sort of swerve down. it can be a real issue there. So you do need to keep your gaze up the road. A mistake that a lot of newer cyclists make is they look at their front wheel because they are trying to see where it is that they are cycling, and they want to make sure they don't hit anything. What you need to do is you need to have your gaze 10, 20 metres up the road, anticipating hazards that you're yet to reach, so that you can spot the hazard ahead of time and take evasive action. If there's some broken glass in the road, you can spot that before you're basically riding over it. So yeah, keep your gaze up the road and try to spot potholes ahead of time. If you do find yourself sort of on a collision course with a pothole, you've got no way of avoiding it, simply, you need to sort of grab the handlebars with some strength, because you need to be able to anticipate the fact the bike may want to sort of twist to the left or to the right when it hits the pothole. But don't grip onto it with a white knuckle, holding on for dear life, because that does actually increase your risk of crashing if you are absolutely like squeezing the bars for dear life. Just hold them confidently, stop pedaling, and you sort of sit just out of the saddle, so you can use your legs as some shock absorbers, and fingers crossed you will hit that pothole, but there won't be any major issues. If it is a major hit and you start to notice things feeling a little bit funny with the bike, or you start hearing some rubbing, pull over and check the spokes on your bike. So just I just sort of pat all of the spokes with my hand, give them a good whack on each side of each wheel, and you're looking for a spoke that could potentially have come loose, or could even have broken in some cases from hitting that pothole, and that will cause you major issues with your bike. So that is something to be aware of there. When it comes to cornering on the road, a lot of our sort of ability to stay upright is going to depend on two things: our speed and our tyres. If we go into a corner really fast, then we're going to increase the risk of ourselves crashing, because we are going to have so much speed that we could end up on the wrong side of the road, where we could end up in a collision with a car, or we could end up with so much speed that we just sort of ride off of the road. So you want to make sure that you go into a corner with appropriate speed, and I suggest you build this up very slowly. Don't get carried away. Don't get cocky, but you can increase the speed at which you go around these corners, and also making sure that you have some good tyres. This is a good way to make sure that you are sort of getting the most out of the corners. Now, as you start to get faster, especially when you're on closed roads, you can start taking a racing line, where you approach a corner and you go out wide onto the other side of the road, then you cut across the corner, sort of the apex of the corner, which is sort of the I can't think of a better word to describe it without using a diagram. The corneriest bit of the corner, so the bit of the corner that sticks out into the road the most. You come close to that, and then you swing out. That allows you to carry more speed through the corner there. Again, this is an episode on road safety rather than a cornering masterclass. But yeah, if you are new to cornering, then just sort of stick quite close and, slow down more than you have to if you're unsure. There are a lot of corners. It's very difficult to know how tight that corner is going to be. It could be you think, oh, this is a really sort of easy corner, but that corner tightens once you get to it. Because it goes around a blind corner, you don't realise that actually it gets really tight. And you carry too much speed into it and run the risk of going onto the wrong side of the road. I recommend, if you can, plug any route that you're following, especially if you don't know the routes, plug any routes into your GPX on your bike and have the map view open. When I'm following a route, I tend to have my power at the top of the screen, and I tend to have the map below it. And by having the map, you can see how tight these corners are that you're approaching, especially when you're descending down a mountain. This can be incredibly helpful to make sure you don't find yourself in trouble. Speaking of descending, going downhill fast, it can be a real thrill ride to be able to drop down a hill really fast. As triathletes, descending isn't a skill that I recommend that you spend a huge amount of time on, or that you take big risks with, because it really is, it's not worth it. You know, if you take all these risks when you are going down a hill, the best case scenario is that you save a minute or two in most cases. Of course, there are some races with long technical descents where you can make up a bit more time, but in the vast majority of cases, you're going to be looking at potentially saving seconds. But the worst case scenario is you crashed your bike and you find yourself in, out of the race, or damaging your clothing, your equipment, all of that. It's not worth pushing the limits on the descent for just your average age group triathlete. So you want to make sure when you're descending that you're keeping your gaze ahead, looking well up the road. Are there any obstructions in the road? Any rocks? Any fallen branches? Where's the next corner? If it's a long descent, if you're going down a mountain, which some events that you do end up going down a mountain, generally after you've ridden up one, you do need to make sure that you're not riding the brakes excessively, because you will encounter something called brake fade. Now, if you have the brakes applied, continuously when you're going down a hill, then that is going to become less useful, because either your rim, in the case of rim brakes, or your rotor, in the case of disc brakes, are going to start to overheat, and they will not end up being as useful. If you are going down a hill and you are really quite scared, and it's going to take you sort of 10-15 minutes or more to get down that hill, if you start feeling your brakes being a bit less reliable, I recommend you pull over, you stop, and just let the brakes cool down before you continue. Because I don't want you to keep riding down, the brakes, feeling a bit dodgy, and then they get to a point and they just don't really work and you're hurting towards a hairpin. If you are a more experienced rider, more experienced descender, then you'll be spending less time on the brakes. You don't have to worry about brake fade nearly as much. But if you are going to a race with a long downhill, you're not a super confident descender, look at maybe getting some sort of larger disc rotors. If you, again, assuming you're riding disc brakes, which most people are in this day and age, make sure you get yourself some ones that are much better, more designed for improved cooling effect, because the ones that came in your bike may be really cheap and nasty. You may want some slightly fancier, bigger ones to help ensure that you don't suffer from the dreaded brake fade. Something else that is a major factor in many parts of the world is poor road surface. So this is, potholes are the obvious ones, but it can also be areas where they might be doing some road works and they may have taken sort of the top layer of tarmac off and you're riding on the sort of the layer beneath it. It could be that it is you're riding on concrete, which is less than ideal. Really, that's gonna give you a little bit of a jarring ride. There are all sorts of reasons out there where you won't be riding on a really nice smooth piece of tarmac. In these cases, you just need to ride sensibly. Don't use this as don't ride at the same speeds, don't corner at the same speeds, keep your wits about you. Really ride to the road conditions, especially in the wet, in the wind. You really need to keep your wits about you, and if in doubt, just slow down. Take it a little bit easier. It's much more important that you finish your ride or finish your race safely than it is that you push the limits. Something else I recommend is that you dress, broadly speaking, for a survival situation. So if you are heading out, especially in the winter time, you don't want to head out with it dressed in a way that you think, oh yes, well, as long as I keep pushing, I'll be fine. Because if you encounter a puncture, if you encounter a mechanical issue, if you have to stop for any reason, you need to be able to be stood at the side of the road for a prolonged period of time without getting hypothermia. And this can, it could be a case of simply having another layer in your jersey pocket with you. It could be a case of taking a rain jacket so that you can put that on, and that can help keep you warm in sort of the early spring or the late autumn, when the temperature's starting to drop a little bit. We don't necessarily want to get the long sleeve jerseys out, but do think about what it is that you can have with you that you might need in an emergency. This includes tools as well. So having a multi-tool, Allen keys, spare inner tube, having a pump or CO2 canisters. In fact, I recommend you always have a pump so that if you really mess up your CO2, you've still got a way of getting home. But just having everything you need. The knowledge, of course, I want you to have the knowledge to be able to do that. But if you don't have the knowledge, then at least if somebody comes along and finds you, then they may be able to help you get you back on the road. But yeah, I don't want you to find yourself heading out with the bare minimum clothing available to avoid getting hypothermic, because yeah, if you end up having an issue with the bike, you could find yourself in trouble quite quickly. Now I'm going to touch on some advice about sort of cars, basically, how to avoid having any kind of issues, altercations with drivers. So first thing to think about is to consider the primary and the secondary riding position. Now the primary position is when you are riding in the road in a manner in which a car would not be able to overtake you on that side of the road. In most cases, there are of course some roads that are narrower, some roads that are wider. Broadly speaking, if you're riding in the primary position, you are saying, this is my lane, and you're going to have to wait or overtake me, on the other side of the road to get around me. If I'm riding out in the countryside, this will be my default position. If I am riding in the city, in a town, if it's or I'm on a busy road, then my default position will be the secondary position, where people just still be able to overtake me, relatively safely, but they'll just have to sort of cross, perhaps without having to sort of move into the next lane, again, depending on the width of the road. The reason that I would encourage people to ride in the secondary position for, in a lot of cases, is that it keeps you out of the way. It means that you cause less issues. If there is a reason for you to want to keep traffic behind you, such as you are approaching a traffic island and you can see the road narrows and you're worried that someone is going to try and squeeze between you and potentially knock you off, then you need to sort of move out sort of to the right into the centre of the road, just for a few hundred metres, to ride in that position. Or if you see there's a big pothole ahead, to be able to move out to the right and to be able to say, look, I'm just going to be out here for a period of time. I'm not going to be, riding here for the whole of my ride. I mean, there's nothing to say that you couldn't sit there for the whole of your ride. But again, it goes back to just, goodwill between cyclists and drivers. If you are just, being really militant and not allowing any cars to get past you without having to overtake you on the other side of the road, then you are just going to really upset a lot of drivers, and when they come across the next cyclist, then they're going to be less than patient. Now, this next tip is arguably the most important part of this entire episode. And if you only take one thing away from this entire episode, I want it to be this. Before you make any change of direction on the bike, I need you to look over your shoulder before you do so. The reason for this is that it helps ensure that there isn't, if you see a pothole in front of you or a traffic island, you think, right, I'm going to move out into the middle of the road to get around that, just take the lane quickly. If there is a car, especially these days we have electric cars, if there is a car that is coming up behind you and you don't realise and you just pull out into their path, bang. Okay? I'm sure I don't need to explain that to you. You need, whenever you make any change of direction, unless if say you're riding on a quiet road, you check over your right hand shoulder, you see there's nothing coming, you move out around the pothole, you probably don't need to make a left hand shoulder check before you pull back in to the other side, because nothing was going to be coming up behind you. But if you are in any urban environment, especially if there are like lots of other cyclists around, which again are silent and they can creep up on you, if you're in any doubt whatsoever, always make a shoulder check. Okay, motorcyclists call these lifesavers, and if you're a motorcyclist, I'm sure you are sat there and you're nodding along right now, going, "Yeah, this guy knows what's going on." If you chat to any motorcyclist about life-saving checks, they will tell you about how many times it has saved their bacon, and the same is true for us as cyclists on the road. Drivers, they don't always have the best spatial awareness. They're not always aware of what's going on, what it is that we might be able to be doing. Just because we're indicating, just because we are signifying our intent, does not mean that they're going to be sort of paying attention to that. They may not be able to read the road and understand what's going on. You need You need to make these shoulder checks whenever you make any change of direction. It doesn't have to be a big change of direction. Okay, if you're just pulling out a little bit, just look over your shoulder quickly before you do so. Don't look for too long, because that can cause you to drift out right. But you do need to make sure whenever you're making any change of direction, look over your shoulder. The amount of times that this has saved me and other cyclists that I know from sort of crashing into other cyclists, crashing into cars, yeah, it's massive. Especially on race day, this even goes. Well, if you, I have real issues on when I'm racing in official Ironman events where the roads are closed and people think, oh, there are no cars, and they just swerve all over the road without looking over their shoulder because there are no cars. Yeah, but there is me doing about twice the speed that you are, closing on you very quickly. And yes, I appreciate that you are passing another cyclist who is slower than you. But if you then sort of pull out right in front of me without looking over your shoulder and seeing that I'm hurtling up behind you, I then have to swerve around you, slam on the brakes, that. Just always look over your shoulder and ask yourself, am I putting myself at risk by changing direction here? Something you need to consider is that of all the road users out there, we are probably the most vulnerable. So we need to act as such, really. We need to ride, expecting people to give way to us when they need to, hoping that they will give us the space that we need. But we also need to prepare in our minds for the fact that they may not. Now, as I said earlier, a lot of the time this is due to ignorance or people not paying attention. Sometimes it's because people have a vendetta against cyclists. But we need to have it in our mind. We need to be thinking ahead. You go, what if that car doesn't stop? What if that lorry hasn't seen us and cuts across us at the next corner? Okay, we need to keep in mind that it is our duty to keep ourselves safe as much as it is other people's duty to avoid us. There are situations that we cannot afford to put ourselves in, such as if we are, again, like the example I used just then, if we are waiting to turn left, in the UK that is, we're waiting to turn left at a junction and we are alongside a HGV and we're in its blind spot, there is a good chance that we could find ourselves hurt in that situation. We need to do one or two things. We either need to pull in front of that HGV, and I mean properly in front, not just, sit there with our wheel right in front of the cab, because the driver won't be able to see us from there. HGVs, it's not the driver's fault. They have massive blind spots, and it's getting better with the cameras that a lot of them have now, but you need to assume that any vehicle doesn't have cameras. If you're going to be in front of a HGV, you need to be well in front of it so that you can see, and I would tend to, if I'm going to pull in front of a HGV, because there's a bike box or something at the junction, I always sort of look over my shoulder to ensure that, just make sure the driver can see me, and if I can make eye contact with the driver, then all the better. But we can either get ourselves in front of the HGV, or my preferred option, if I find myself in this position where I don't want to be, is that I will actually bump my bike onto the pavement and I'll let that HGV make that left-hand turn, and I will probably if I was planning to turn left anyway, I'll probably walk my bike around that turn, wait for the traffic light to turn red, and then continue to make that turn. You do not want to find yourself in a fight with a HGV. You will lose every single time. And yes, there is an onus on the driver to make sure that they are not, obviously crushing cyclists when they make left-hand turns or right-hand turns. But also, if we place ourselves in a position where we know we are in their blind spot, and we make no effort to change that, then yeah, there is obviously that responsibility on us as well. We need to make sure that we indicate on the road if we're turning left, if we're turning right. You cannot afford to simply sort of turn right, especially if you're turning across lanes of traffic. You can't afford to simply swerve across because you don't know when somebody might be planning to overtake and they're about to put their foot down. You need to make sure that you indicate your intention, and I will tend to indicate and then do a shoulder check. So that you indicate and a driver can hopefully go, oh, they're about to turn right. You look over your right hand shoulder, your right shoulder, and you go, yeah, there's nothing coming up behind me, and you can then make that turn. In fact, if I am cutting across traffic to do so, I may actually keep looking over my shoulder whilst I make that turn with my right arm out, just to make sure that there's no plonker that, decide they want to try and sort of, accelerate past me before I make that turn. Yeah, again, equally important when you're making left-hand turns to just sort of make sure drivers know what you're doing. If you look on the highway code, there are other signals that you can make, such as like flapping your arm if you're slowing down. I don't do that, if I'm honest. I don't think many cyclists do. If I'm approaching a roundabout, and it's a relatively fast moving roundabout with other cars behind me, I will actually take my hand, I will sort of place it in the air, and I will sort of make a pointing action towards, so almost like a chopping action with my hand in front of me to indicate that I am going straight ahead at this roundabout as opposed to turning left. Again, it's just a courtesy. It's not something I need to do. I'm just indicating my intention to people so they know that I'm not going to be turning right. But yeah, use these signals. I guess the only time that I potentially wouldn't signal is if I am if I'm in a situation where I need to keep access to that right hand brake. So if I am approaching a junction and I'm going to turn right and I stick my right hand, my right arm out, I'll indicate right, I'm going to turn right here. But then to be able to make that turning and to slow down ahead of that turning, I need to use my brakes. So I'll indicate and then I'll go back to my hands back on the brakes, and I'll make another second check over my shoulder before I commit to making that right hand turn. Because I don't want to do a left hand turn, a right hand turn without access to my front brake, because that just seems foolish. So that there is a time and place for that, and occasionally I have found myself riding sort of fast, where I look around. If I do a quick shoulder check to see what's coming, and I see there is nothing in that lane, and I'm visibly doing a shoulder check, sometimes I won't, if I feel it's safer, I'd rather have my hands on the brakes, especially if the car's in front of me. I'd rather actually have my hands on the brakes than to indicate into a lane with no traffic in it. But again, that's just a decision that I occasionally make on a very kind of context-specific basis. If you are new to cycling, I recommend that you just make a point of cycling every time, make a point of indicating every time that you approach a junction or a roundabout or anything like that, to make sure drivers know what to expect from you. Something else we can do to really protect ourselves is to ride predictably. So essentially sort of ride our bike as if we were sort of driving the car. This is what drivers expect. This is what they will anticipate you doing. There are various, in the highway code, in the UK at least, there are various exemptions for various things for cyclists, such as where you can position yourself in your lane and all that, but I will always place my bike where I would if I was driving, because that's what people expect. And just because the highway code says something doesn't mean that drivers are going to be anticipating that. So if you ride predictably, don't weave around, don't slam on your brakes. Of course, sometimes you need to. Don't make last minute turns, all this. You just try to ride in a smooth, predictable fashion will go a long, long way to helping you prevent any accidents. One of my top tips, especially at roundabouts, is to make eye contact with drivers. If a driver is approaching a roundabout, they are going to be looking to their right in the UK to check to see if there's anyone there. If you are, as a result, you should then be able to make eye contact with the driver in most cases, not always, but take the time to be able to make eye contact so that you know that they have seen you. Because you will often have drivers who will approach a roundabout or junction, they'll stop because they see a cyclist, and they will then do a calculation in their head and they go, can I pull out in front of this cyclist without hitting them? And a lot of the time they go, yeah, I'll risk it for a biscuit. If you make eye contact with that driver, then you are going to cause them to think a little bit more carefully about this decision. And you also know that they have definitely seen you and they're not going to pull straight out on you anyway. And whilst I would always recommend it against stopping in the middle of a junction or a roundabout or something like that, if you do believe that a car is about to pull out in front of you, you can at least start really slowing down in anticipation of them perhaps pulling out on you. Again, you want to ride predictably. You don't want to brake unless you have to. But if it's just you, if there's no other cars, I mean, if there are other cars, the cars will generally wait because they're, oh well, it's a car, it's a bit different, isn't it? But if it's just a bike, sometimes they will look and they go, oh, I will pull out. This is especially an issue when you are going to be going faster than the average bike. So it could be there was a notorious junction at the bottom of Kingston Hill that I always hated when I lived in London, because I'd be going down the hill, I'd be doing 30 miles an hour, and a bike would come off of the A3, they'd look up and they'd go, oh look, there's a cyclist coming, but that's alright, it's only a cyclist, and they'd pull out without realising that I was going faster than they were, and I'd have to slam on my brakes to avoid going to the back of them. So you really do, and I did that drive, several that ride several times a week on my way to the bike shop I worked at, and so it was, you do just have to sort of keep your wits about you and kind of expect the unexpected, because I mean I think that's one of the reasons that I managed to make it. I still have never been knocked off by a car. Because I expect the unexpected. I expect if you expect somebody to pull out on you and you're pleasantly surprised when they don't, then that is going to go an awful lot better than go, well, it's my right of way, it's my priority, so I'm going to plough on through. Speaking of priority, speaking of right of way, something else that I have encountered when I've been out, especially in London, is where you have a driver that would be sort of driving alongside you, and they will make a left turn and they will sort of do sort of a left hook basically. They will just pull out as if you weren't there, to go to pull into a side road, and yeah, it's sort of expecting you to slow down, expecting you to give way because you're a cyclist. They believe they have right of way. They don't. They would be held liable in an accident. But that doesn't mean that doesn't change the fact that you could end up knocked off of your bike. These left hooks, broadly speaking, they don't tend to be, because they tend to happen at low speed. They don't tend to be sort of as dangerous as some other accidents. I've definitely seen videos online of cars that they'll be doing sort of a right hand turn from the other side of the road, and they will be, they'll be accelerating around that junction whilst a cyclist is riding along 20 miles an hour and a cyclist goes straight into the side of the car. That's much more dangerous than that sort of left hook. But again, there's nothing to say that you can't be dragged under the car. So you do just need to be aware of that this might happen. If you have a car that is that looks like it is at a speed, when it's sort of overtaking you, it looks like it's a speed where it's about to turn, then again, you do need to. I mean, I will sometimes just sort of back off in that situation, let the car turn, and the driver might look a bit confused and sort of put a hand up and go, oh, well, thanks. But I'd much rather do that than sort of plough and go, well, it's my right of way, and end up being hit off my bike as a result. I mentioned this earlier with a near miss that I did have in Tooting, but when there are ambulances or fire engines, police cars, any kind of blue light emergency vehicle on the road, drivers stop thinking because they think, I need to get out of the road of this vehicle. And in that case, I will always recommend that you stop where you are. You treat yourself as if you're a car. You stop passing vehicles on the inside if you're filtering. You pull over to the side of the road or sort of slow down with the rest of the traffic. You don't see this as a chance to overtake. You don't see this as a chance to make up a little bit of ground. You stop and you wait. You don't do anything unpredictable. You are wholly predictable in this situation, and you are aware for a driver of vehicles to do something really stupid because they panic when they hear those lights. And I'm going to recommend that you don't ever make rude gestures at drivers. Now, I'd be lying if I said I've never done this myself, but the fact of the matter is that if you start, making a sarcastic clapping gesture, or you give a driver the finger or anything like that, especially if you are on a fast rural road, there is nothing stopping them from just doing a 3-point turn, driving back and just driving over you. There are a lot of drivers out there, largely men, not always men, but largely men, who have very little emotional regulation. Like, they cannot stand the chance of them. They can't stand the idea of anyone being, being a bigger man than them, or it really is pathetic. It's levels of sort of Andrew Tate cringe and, small dick syndrome. But you need to prepare yourself for the fact that they could have a completely unhinged response to this. And you just need to, I mean, the most you could do is like if somebody really cuts you up, just I don't know, like a disappointed shake of the head. I don't know, it's like the absolute most that I would use, sort of you're flinging your arms up in the air or giving them the finger or something. The last that you want is for them to get out of the car and and start a fight with you, or just reverse into you. Again, people, they have so little emotional regulation, they may think they can just drive off. And if there were, if say you had a camera on your bike, some people choose to cycle with cameras in urban areas. I did for a time, then I realised that it was just the sort of the faff of having to erase the card every time it got full. I didn't have an especially big SD card, so every sort of 2 or 3 times a week I'd have to wipe the card. I never recorded anything of interest anyway, I just sort of got out of the habit of it. But it's not a terrible idea to ride with the camera. But if you did record the incident on a camera of a driver reversing into you, and you went to the police with that, and they found the driver, and they go, oh yes, but he gave me the finger or something, that does go against you in a claim, because you are agitating the situation. I recommend, if you go back and listen to episode, I want to say it's episode 5, episode 4, really is from the early days of the podcast. Interview one of my clients, Stuart, and he talks, he's a serving detective in the Met, and he discusses how to protect yourself in the road, what your rights are, and he talks about de-escalating a situation. That is the police's job, is to de-escalate a situation. The last thing you want to do in any situation is to escalate it with a rude hand gesture, by flinging insults around. Okay, you want to keep yourself safe. Yes, you may be legally and morally completely in the right, but you need to de-escalate the situation. Just be the bigger man or woman in that situation, and go, what an arsehole. And yes, you can report that driver if you have video evidence of them cutting you up. They will get, Operation Snap, you can submit footage through. But the last, but if you have that footage, you can send it off, and they can end up getting 3 or 6 penalty points because of the way they acted. It's much better to just do that and have that smug, yes, they did cut me up or give me a really close pass, but they get points on the licence for that, I'll make sure of that. Then start waving your hand around, calling them an arsehole, and you end up in the hospital, or worse, as a result of that. If a driver feels the need, if you were just sort of riding completely within the law, and a driver takes it upon themselves to get out of the car and start a fight with you, something that Stuart, my client, did say was that, under law, you are entitled to self-defense, which does include a preemptive strike. So if you think this guy's coming over, he's going to smack you one, you can smack him before he smacks you, and you're completely within your rights of self-defense to do so. Obviously you want to avoid getting into this situation at all, but if somebody's having a bad day, if somebody deems that you've held them up for too long or want to start a fight with you, you can defend yourself if you believe that you're about to be hit. Now, in many parts of the world, it's legal for cyclists to filter through traffic. So we can filter in the UK down the left through traffic. I make a point of only ever doing this through stationary traffic. If I am picking my way through some traffic, but a light turns green and cars start moving, I will stop passing on the left, because the chances are that a lot of drivers wouldn't expect a cyclist to be sort of passing them on the left while they're moving. They would expect anything passing them to be on the right. So that's what I do personally, and again, I think that's sort of one of the reasons that I was lucky enough as, to never get involved in an accident when cycling in London, is that, I don't filter unless the traffic is stationary. In many parts of the world, it would not be legal for cyclists to filter, in which case I highly recommend that you don't do that, because drivers will definitely not be expecting that. And if you are going to be overtaking drivers when they are moving, then it's best to always do that on the right hand side. If they are just getting up to speed, but you're carrying a lot of speed at the time, I would just recommend that you brake, you lose that momentum. It's frustrating, but it's much better to do that than to pull up alongside them, sort of pass them on the left when they may be being passed on the right by motorcyclists and other users, and they may actually sort of veer to the left to give that motorcyclist space and go into you as a result. It's not worth it. I recommend you take the time to plan your routes carefully. So rather than just whacking a route off of Strava or Komoot or Map My Ride or any other of these other services, rather than just sort of whacking a route in and going and following it blindly, take the time to have a look at that route. It only takes 5 minutes. Get a map out and go, okay, where is it that it's expecting me to go? Because you may find actually, it's expecting me to go along this really busy road. I think Google Maps is especially bad for that. If you use the sort of the bike mode on Google Maps, because bikes can legally go on dual carriageways, but it doesn't mean that you're going to want to. So do check this, and sometimes you can see what looks like a yes, there's a little road there that it will take me along that will sort of bypass that dual carriageway. Actually, there isn't a road there, and it is expecting you to just go alongside that dual carriageway. Caught me out when walking once, sort of last week with my dog, and we had what looked like it was somewhere we'd never been before, and it looked like there was a little road that ran alongside the dual carriageway, or a little footpath that ran alongside the dual carriageway. Step out, through this gate onto the other side, and no, the footpath does just run alongside the dual carriageway. It's only about 200 meters, which if you're walking on your own with other adults wouldn't be a problem. But there with my dog, it was too much, and we just turned around and went home. So don't get caught out on this. If you're unsure, you can have a look at the satellite view on Google Maps, and you should then hopefully from that be able to spot if there is actually a footpath or another little road running alongside it, or whether that is just sort of part of a larger road instead. I would also recommend that you don't blindly follow road signs or buses to get you to your destination. Terrible idea. Especially in urban areas where a lot of buses will take a really they really go around the houses in to sort of head to their final destination. Terrible idea. But unless you are like super like comically lost, in which case you may just sort of wait with that bus. At every bus stop that it goes to, knowing that ultimately you will get to the place on the front of the bus. But I made the mistake when I was cycling where I got dropped by a group on the way to Brighton and got to Ditchling, and instead of going straight ahead and going up the beacon, I followed the sign to Brighton, which pulled me round to the right, and I ended up on a 5-lane fast road, 70-mile-an-hour limit, and I had to be in one of the 3 right-hand lanes to get to Brighton. It was scary. Don't make that mistake. Don't just follow the road signs to get you to your destination. Get the map out, look at where you're going. I'm going to round off this episode with some tips for cycling in a group. Now, a lot of cyclists will find comfort in riding as part of a group. Okay, they feel less vulnerable, and I get it. But the fact of the matter is, all of the nasty crashes that I've had on my bike have been when I've been riding as part of a group. Okay, it's other cyclists doing stupid things and causing crashes. Actually, to be honest, one of them, I guess it was part of one crash that I had was when I was riding along in a group and we were doing about 40k an hour. So we were shifting, and I hit a pothole. And nobody called out the pothole, so they swerved around it because they knew it was there. It was a fairly sort of well-known pothole, but I didn't know it was there. And I went smashing through this pothole. Nobody called it out, and I thought, okay, I hit a pothole, but these things happen. And unbeknownst to me, I had a front puncture, and I went into this corner at 40k an hour. With no front tyre, essentially, with a predictable crash as a result. Now, if I'd been riding solo, I would have been able to spot the pothole, I would be able to, well, hopefully spotted it and be able to make my way around it. Or if I'd been riding with a more conscientious group of cyclists, then they could have called it out and I could have avoided that situation. Or if I had to hit that pothole really hard, I would have probably noticed that I had a front tyre before I got to that corner. I wouldn't have gone around it at 40 kilometers per hour. When I was riding with another group, I was going downhill. Again, my favourite speed to crash at, about 45 kilometers an hour. We're going down this hill, and we approached a junction. Now, the guy who was on the front apparently rode a lot of motorbikes, and what you do when you're on a bike, apparently if you approach a junction, you just back off a little bit in case something appears out of that junction. It gives you more time to react to it. So this guy starts randomly braking ahead of this junction, which everybody else kind of gets freaked at, and they start braking, and it sends this this ripple through the group of everyone sort of slamming on their brakes. And I see this girl in front of me go over her handlebars, and next thing I know, I'm just lying in the middle of the road. Like, what happened? Yeah, I went flying over my handlebars and smashed my face open. So, it's not necessarily safer to ride in a group. Obviously you're less likely to get hit by a car, but you are more likely to get taken out by another cyclist doing something stupid. So if you're riding in a group, you need to be hyper vigilant, okay? You can't afford to just look at the wheel of the rider in front and follow it blindly. You need to be looking around. Is there a corner coming up? Which way are we going? You need to keep your wits about you rather than just sat there, especially if it's a route you're not used to. Rather than just chatting away, you do need to keep your wits, who's behind me, who's alongside me, what are the road conditions. You need to keep your brain engaged. It's probably more dangerous than riding solo, all things being said. You want to keep a distance from between you and the rider in front, especially if you don't know them. There are some riders that I ride with who I trust, inherently, and I will ride really close behind them because I want to make the most of that draft effect, and I want to make sure that I am sort of using the energy, and I trust them not to behave unpredictably. If this is a complete stranger in front of you, or if you haven't really ridden with this person before, give yourself some distance between you and that rider. You may have somebody go, "Oh, close that gap." You want to make sure you're getting the best drafting benefit possible. Just say, "No, I'm fine, thank you." Even if it means riding at the back of the group, that is sort of the better way to be if you don't know who it is that you're riding behind. Don't make any sudden changes in speed or direction. The biggest cause of crashes in groups are people braking unexpectedly, as with the one that I just explained to you, even though we were going downhill at the time. It is somebody braking without calling out slowing or stopping or anything like that, and suddenly this rider who was riding behind them suddenly finds themselves like almost on top of this other rider who's gone from moving to stationary. They have to swerve out, slam on their brakes, and it causes chaos in this group. So just ride predictably, no sudden changes in speed, no sudden changes in direction. Obviously, if there's a pothole, you may need to swerve around it, but just shout out "hole" so that people know that you're about to do something stupid, and to give them at least some time to react to that. And call out those hazards, hole or hazard. If there is something like a fallen branch in the road, just call these things out so that other people can react to that. I'm going to touch on the subject of riding two abreast here. If you are riding two abreast, then that is perfectly legal to do it in most countries if you have a rider directly to your left or to your right. In some ways, it is the safer way to ride because if a driver is trying to overtake a train of 4 bikes long, then it's a lot easier for them to overtake a train that's 4 bikes long but 2 cyclists wide. It does depend on the road. There are some roads where it is perfectly safe for a driver to be able to pass you as a bike without having to move onto the other side of the road to do so, in which case it is more conscientious for you as a group of cyclists to ride single file, allow all those cars to go past you without causing an issue. When you're on smaller roads, on narrower roads, it is actually safer for you to ride two abreast to really make the drivers have to think about making a safe pass. I would much rather let a car past than have a driver behind me that is really frustrated and trying to get past, because they are more likely to make a stupid decision to try to overtake when there isn't enough space. You do have incidents where you'll have a cyclist, not a cyclist, a driver who's trying to overtake a cyclist, and they will do so when there isn't enough space, and they will nearly cause a collision with an oncoming car as a result. Because they were so frustrated behind that cyclist that they nearly caused an accident with that car in front. And let's be honest, if a driver has a choice between, causing an incident with a car that is in front of them that they didn't expect to have an incident with, or just swerving left into the cyclist they're trying to overtake, they're probably going to choose to swerve into the cyclist and hit another car. It's just the way that the brain works. I'd probably make that decision in that moment myself, but I wouldn't ever overtake a cyclist unless I was sure I could do so safely. I've actually had it. What was it? A couple of weeks ago, I was on the road as a driver, and I'd like to think I'm a good driver. We'd all like to think that, wouldn't we? But I was behind a cyclist and I couldn't see around the corners enough to be able to pull out around them and know that I could put my foot down and get past them. So I was waiting for the right time for myself to be able to pass, and I had an irate driver behind me as a driver because I wouldn't get around this cyclist, but I knew that there was no safe way for me to get around this cyclist, and this driver is really, so he's beeping his horn at me saying get round this cyclist, because he's like waving his arms at me in his car. If a driver is stuck behind a cyclist, they will make very emotionally driven, childish choices, and that is why when I'm riding on a narrow country lane and I know that I'm holding up traffic, if I can come up to a lay-by, or that there could be a gate into a farmer's field, and I know that there's been drivers behind me for like a minute or more, I will just swing by and I'll let them go past, and I normally get a hand of appreciation, because it develops goodwill between cyclists and drivers. It's me as a cyclist going, I'm aware I'm holding you up, I don't feel great about holding you up, but when I get the chance to, I will pull over and let you pass, because I want to generate goodwill between cyclists and drivers, but also by letting them pass, I know that they are not going to make a stupid decision and cause a crash. So yes, it is my right to be able to ride in the road and hold up traffic all day long. But as a human being, I want to ensure that people are getting on their way and that they're not going to make a dodgy overtake and risk causing an accident. I think that is everything. To summarise, always act like everyone around you is an idiot. I mean, it's a good tip for driving as well. Spend more time thinking about what other people are doing around you than what it is that you are doing yourself. Expect the unexpected. Ride predictably. Make sure that you're seen, that your bike is roadworthy. Ride your bike as if it were a car in many situations, so that people don't expect you to do something really sort of unexpected. Always look over your shoulder before you make a change in direction. And know that as long as you are riding in a safe, predictable fashion, a roadworthy bike, that road cycling is an inherently safe thing to do. Yes, there is always the risk of accidents, but there is a lot that you can do as a cyclist to prevent yourself from finding yourself in these accidents. Okay? I can never make any guarantees about the safety of anybody. I mean, it could be that, somebody could head out for their first ever ride and there could be a drunk driver on the road with them. There's never any guarantees. It's all probability. But as long as you are taking sensible precautions, stick on those lights, wear sensible clothing if you're cycling in the low light or in the darkness. Be mindful when you're in groups. Don't try to overtake cars when it's not safe to do so for the sake of maintaining momentum or average power or average speed. Actually, you know what? That's an incredibly important point I didn't touch on. If you are out doing a session outdoors, whether it is a zone 2 session, whether it's an interval session, whether it's a tempo session, whatever it is that you're doing, your safety comes before your workout. I cannot say that enough. You really need to ensure that if you have the choice between, should I go for this KOM or hold this threshold interval? Or do I back off and play it safe? Always play it safe. Because, the financial costs, the mental trauma that comes from being in an accident on the road, I can speak for that myself. I was scared of riding my bike on the road after that crash. It took me years to get my confidence back downhill on the downhills. It is not worth it taking these risks. So if in any doubt, play it safe. And this is true on race day as well. Even when there are no cars, just back off a little bit when you are going around those corners. Don't throw yourself around these corners trying to find the upper limit of grip. You may save a second or two, but over the course of your race, unless you're a professional athlete trying to stay in a group in a draft legal race, it is not worth the risk, okay? I want people to be enjoying this sport for years to come, okay? Do not take risks in training, on race day. If you have a difficult workout, it's probably safer to do it indoors. If you live in a part of the world where a lot of drivers are really hostile towards cyclists, you may need to make sure that you are riding really early in the morning. Just before sunrise, before all the other cars are out. Get out there. Get the ride done early before you start to get all the commuters, before we start to get all the idiots on the road. Get out there and get your ride done when it's safe to do so. I hope you found this helpful. I hope you found this useful. If you are an experienced road cyclist and you've been listening to this and you've been thinking, oh, but Simon didn't mention this, please drop me a comment on Spotify, drop me an email. If it is something that I believe is really important that I've simply forgotten when I made my notes ahead of the episode, and it's something I need to include, I will go back in and I'll fit it into this episode, okay? Because I want this to be, a nice resource for people to come to when they are, new to road cycling or nervous about road cycling, or they just want to learn about how to better, protect themselves on the road and ensure that they stay safe. So, thank you once again for your company. I hope you found that useful. A reminder about the 15% discount on my Step Up to Ironman plans. You can find that down in the show notes. I am going to be creating, next I think I'm going to focus on the Ironman from scratch plans. So I'm going to be writing training plans that will take you everything from 24 to 50 weeks preparing for an Ironman from scratch. And then I'll move on to focusing more on the half distance plans. Look for those appearing in the coming weeks and months. Until then, okay, I really wishing you the very best of luck with your week of training. I hope that as the weather starts to improve in the northern hemisphere, some of you are going to be getting out. Hope this episode makes you feel more confident about riding on the road. And I'll see you all very soon.